This is Melee's final character roster. All 26 characters that made it into the game are shown here. A funny thing people don't know is that this character select screen, months before the game was finalized, had severely less characters in the game. Late in Melee's short 13-month development cycle, Masahiro Sakurai realized they had time to either add a brand new character to the game or add a handful of clone characters to finalize the roster. The characters that ended up making the game were the following, according to the debug mode: Falco, Young Link, Dr.Mario, Roy, Pichu, and finally Ganondorf. These characters were added so late in development, Roy had a placeholder name called Emblem because Sakurai was going to go directly to Intelligent Systems to see which character they should add to the roster. Ganondorf was such a last-minute inclusion. The model was lifted straight from the Legend of Zelda Space World build, and if it didn't fit perfectly on Captain Falcon's rig, Ganondorf wouldn't have made the game. What was the character that Sakurai was going to add instead of these clone characters? Who was close to making it? Well, it was actually Wario. Sakurai mentioned in an interview that Wario was so close to making the game that while some rumors say he was going to be a Mario clone, those were actually not legit. Wario was planned to be a full-fledged character in Melee's early stages, so if they were to add Wario, not only would there be no clone characters added to the game, Sakurai also mentioned that adding Wario would bleed into other characters' development too, like Marth and Mewtwo. So they ended up going with the latter, adding as many clone characters as possible that they could do in their realistically short development time. The Smash 2 poll, as we mentioned earlier, is the first time ever in Smash history that they created a public poll where people could send requests for characters. The poll was integral for characters like Peach, Bowser, Mewtwo, Ganondorf making Melee, and other characters like Wario, King Dedede, and Meta Knight making Brawl. Funnily enough, Lucas was actually planned to be in Melee. This was because Earthbound 64 was in development at the time until the game was pushed further into development hell, and was ultimately led into flux for many years. The idea of adding Lucas became scrapped. He was even going to replace Ness, and this would have been the first time a character from Smash 64 wouldn't have been playable in the sequel Smash game. But obviously that wasn't the case. Earthbound 64 would be more in development as a GBA game that we all know and love, Mother 3. That game wouldn't release until 2006. Ness stayed in Melee, but at least Lucas made it into Brawl eventually, so there is that. Sakurai was approached during the development of Melee by Sega of all companies, asking to add Sonic to the game. It was simply too late in development to add Sonic, as he would be a brand new character and you couldn't possibly clone Sonic from somebody. This was actually confirmed by Yuji Naka himself, which, yeah, this is definitely legit. Hideo Kojima also approached Sakurai on adding Solid Snake in the game, mainly because Kojima's son really wanted to play as Snake in Smash. However, by the time Sakurai had gotten the request, it was way too far in development to make that possible. But again, on the bright side, both Sonic and Snake made it into Brawl as Smash's first third-party characters. Before Sakurai landed on the Ice Climbers in Melee, there was actually many other choices that the team was going through instead of choosing the Ice Climbers. Balloon Fighter was considered, Urban Champion was considered, Bubbles from Clu Clu Land was also considered, and even an Excite Bike character. Sakurai landed on the Ice Climbers for their rather unique moveset and having a character that probably was the easiest to put in the game. Ayumi Tachibana from Famicom Detective Club was also considered as a playable character, as confirmed by Sakurai in an interview in 2016. She was ultimately dropped as Sakurai felt her series was more niche compared to other series that they could pull from and would be widely unfamiliar to international audiences, which is funny because that was the same reason Marth and Roy were almost removed in the international versions of Melee. Kind of funny how that also became part of the case here. There was also a subset of characters that Sakurai discussed their inclusion with, but they ultimately weren't considered, being Takamaru, who was unlikely as the series for Takamaru had not been received a game in several years and the game itself was rather obscure. Takamaru, though, later appeared as an assist trophy in Smash 4 and Ultimate. Sakurai stated he wanted Mach Rider in the game, as he said his generation would be more familiar with them, and also the name being rather cool. Similar to Excite Bike, it was probably hard to figure out this character's moveset, so it was probably dropped that way. A character from Rare was highly requested during the Smash 2 poll. While they were trying to add a GoldenEye and Perfect Dark trophies to the game, the highly requested characters seemed to be James Bond and Banjo and Kazooie. These characters were ultimately never considered due to the overall difficulty it would have been to get the rights for a film character pretty much in Smash. Sakurai talked about the difficulty of adding a character that would also use guns and weaponry to a Nintendo game. Banjo also being a third-party character as well would be probably rather difficult to work out. Ultimately, Sakurai would have trouble with getting the rights to to even add rare trophies to the game itself, so the likelihood of a full-fledged character would be very slim. But hey, at least Banjo made it into Smash Ultimate, there is that at least. People speculated Wolf was going to be a clone of Fox due to him being in Melee's trailer for the game, but there's no evidence of Wolf ever being in the game. Leaf from Fire Emblem, many people thought Leaf was going to take Roy's spot at some point, but again, there's no evidence to this. Many people think King Dedede was going to be in Melee as well because they actually wanted to include him in Smash 64. However, unlike Wario, we don't really have solid proof outside of the obvious demand for him in the Smash 2 poll. It's safe to say if Melee had another year or two of development, they probably would have fit Dedede obviously in the game. That didn't happen, so Dedede ended up making Brawl, of course. Thank you guys for watching the video. There's a Patreon down below if you guys want to get videos early, and there's also a Discord community if you join the Patreon. Thank you guys for watching so much. You guys have a good one. Drink water and stay safe. Thank you.